Hello, welcome back to another episode of A Little Atypical. My name is Leja, you can call me Lay, and have you ever been really excited to do something, but then you got stuck in the process of taking the first step? I got inspired to do this episode after the response of last week's episode. Surprisingly, it received a lot more attention than I expected. It kind of made me think about how I struggled for at least years to do a wellness podcast at the time, and even now, all I heard was it's so saturated, everyone has a podcast. It's kind of the same if you want to start a business, be a content creator, be an influencer, whatever you want to do. There's always the internal dilemma of how do you even get started on the things you want to do? And what even holds people back in the first place from taking the first step? So this episode is going to cover all of that, so stay tuned. To jump right into it, I want to talk about the importance of perspective. Why having perspective is so valuable regardless of whatever you want to do. Have you ever thought about the difference between being original versus being unique? Back when I was in college, I had two classes bring up this point. It was my strategic planning class and my digital writing class. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because not enough people think about this. Like, if you want to start your business, start your podcast, start your YouTube channel, just do something for yourself, even write a book. Those things are not original ideas, right? It is very hard to have and be original nowadays, but you can always be unique. So the difference between being original and being unique is original usually means you're the first to do something, like the absolute first person to do something, whereas being unique is you take something that already exists and put your own spin on it. And when I answered that question while being in college, I believe I said something along the lines, it is very hard to be original. And the reason I had this perspective is because how many things are just repurposed? This is something designers do a lot, because when you are a designer, when you are a creative, you are a problem solver. And a lot of the things you create solutions for are things that you observed. You're looking for ways to improve it. And another example I wanted to talk about with this aspect is storytelling. I don't know if you guys remember a few weeks ago, there was a lot of controversy on social media about a live action Tango movie. One perspective that I didn't hear enough people talk about is the fact that remakes and spin-offs are not a new concept. There has been so many remakes or retellings of the same story. Like, let me ask you a question. How many versions of Cinderella is there? And the reason why Cinderella essentially is able to be remade so many times but told in different ways. Like, think about it. There was the Cinderella movie that was with music. There was the Cinderella movie with dancing. There was the Brandy version of Cinderella. There was the cartoon versions of Cinderella. There are so many versions of Cinderella. Even so, none of them are the same as the original Grimm story. And a lot of Disney movies come from Grimm stories where they changed it to make it more kid-friendly, because I'm pretty sure in the original Cinderella that the sisters cut off their toes to try to fit into the slipper, and I think animals attack them at the end. My point is, we retell the same stories over and over again. And we can't do that with every single story. You cannot do that with Princess and the Frog, because a main subject point of the story is her being African American. She has to work hard because of the time period, and her race does play a factor that prevents her from being a business owner. and that was a key segment in the movie. So I kind of hate when people start saying, why don't we make Tiana white, when race was the purpose, a huge plot point, and it wasn't just about her being a woman. It was about her being a black woman. So if you argue that whenever you're mad about like Little Mermaid, when Little Mermaid is about a mermaid, and also all of the songs in The Little Mermaid are so Caribbean coded. I'm just saying, with Rapunzel, I do understand how it could have cultural significance, but I do think instead of doing a remake, it wouldn't be such a bad thing to do a retelling of the story, but change the names, but have the same storyline, because that is something that has been done time and time again. And people ask like, oh, why can't we just have original stories? And this goes into my point. The thing about original stories, besides the fact that industry really doesn't allow new perspectives, and the fact, the reason why we have retellings of so many stories, even if let's take away Disney for a second. The movie 10 Things I Hate About You was based on Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. We retell stories and we do it constantly without people realizing. And the reason why those stories still remain really popular, even if it's been told and done before, is because even though it is unique based on how they do it, it is also very familiar. It is psychologically proven. Many people gravitate to familiar things. The name of this is actually called the mere exposure effect, which is a psychological phenomenon in which people refer to things that they are familiar with. The more frequently people are exposed to something, the more they tend to prefer it. Okay, so before I continue with this point, something I really wanted to add and clarify is, personally, I do believe that originality is something so important, but I am just adding perspective to the conversation. So the reason why I wanted to bring up this point, talk about familiarity, even though I am someone who thinks that originality should be more presented in the world, our society continuously discourages originality. And what I mean by that is, think about what is more encouraged for you to do. Like when you want to do something with your life, is the arts encouraged as much as other fields and other professions? The thing is, there would be more originality if the arts was in fact encouraged and artists, creatives were not constantly told it's not a real job to be a creative. When it is a real job, but it's a job that uses a different strength, a lot of people ultimately discourage it by saying, oh, if you're a creator, you add nothing to society, when in fact adding ideas into society would make our society more empathetic, and people don't realize that. Continuing on with that point, if the work you do is not as profitable, people don't see it as real work or real value in our society. This is a point I want to bring up. I had a deep thought the other day, and this is more like a theory of why people do remakes and stuff like that from a business perspective. So this is not my perspective, and this is just an idea of why there are so many remakes like that out there and retellings of the same story. And I think a huge part about that is they understand the psychological appeal of the familiar. That's one. You know it works already. So when you add diversity into the mix, it is putting something on the screen that is not as risky. With original stories, it is a higher risk. And it also is more of a high risk in the sense of, not because they wouldn't be well received, but I also think that if a movie is not marketed correctly and it's a more of an original story, it won't generate as much natural interest. Because we've seen that happen before with movies. Like, I heard Elemental, I still haven't watched it yet, more so because I haven't had the time to watch it. But I heard a lot of people say that the movie was better than they expected, and it was really a fail of the marketing team to promote the movie. With familiar concepts, with adding diversity into something that was already made, it does, for certain groups of people, spark outrage. We've seen that with the fan cast. It wasn't even something that was actually happening, but you saw how talked about it became. From a marketing perspective, word of mouth, when you talk about things, which is word of mouth marketing, it kind of adds to it so they don't have to invest in marketing as much. It's already a popular topic, even if they have some negativity. On the other hand, you get different types of personas viewing it. So you have the people who are outraged by it because it makes them so uncomfortable. But on the other hand, you have the people who really wish they would see more of themselves on the screen and is really happy for that representation, especially if they have a personality close to who is on screen, like whether it's like Rapunzel or, whoever, Ariel, whatever. And you get the people who are hearing about this and hearing people complain and now just want to see it out of spite, because that is very much a real consideration. And there will be people who see it out of spite as well. So from a business perspective, doing the familiar is more profitable, quote unquote. Does that mean I agree that it should be? Absolutely not. I think many of us, or a good amount of us, do want our original stories out there, but we also are in a weird place in society. And I'm not going to say anyone can't, because I do believe people should try to make their own opportunities. I do believe that we should go for things, but I am putting in that perspective because sometimes certain aspects of conversations go unnoticed. It's just an observation. In terms of movies, this is a very important point of the value of perspective, because yes, there are so many people who want to do the same things as you, but what's important is you doing it in your own way. And even when we do business classes, we talk about something called your unique selling point. What makes you unique? What makes you stand out? And this is something that has to be talked about. When I was doing my research, I actually came across something because someone made a post and it was about music and books and the mere exposure effect. What they were talking about in their post, it was so fascinating because basically what they were saying is we can listen to the same songs over and over and over, but with books, people like suspense and thriller and not exactly the same story. I did have a point that I found interesting, so I'm going to read 2 quotes from it. The first quote: I liked it. I read lots of other things by him. I like Meg Walters' books, so I keep reading them. They're all familiar, but I like them all, okay? I have no interest reading her young adult style books, but that fits the story too, of wanting to stick with the familiar. Quote 2: I'm not rereading or rewatching the same story in the same way that I rehearing the same song. And yes, it makes me happy when I hear a familiar Rem song pop up on the radio. And yes, we will reread books and rewatch movies, but that's just an occasional thing, not the norm. Setting aside the experience of small children who want to hear the same story over and over. In the same way, listening to a familiar album is the norm in music listening, or in the way that when we go to a concert, we like to hear some of the hits we've heard so many times. So what this person was talking about specifically is how with music, we don't mind repetition. and because we gravitate towards the familiar, because I think in their post, they compared re-listening to music to comfort food. It was a very interesting thing. But one thing I thought about after reading that article is even in stories and with stories, even if we don't watch the same things over and over, a lot of times we gravitate to the elements that we enjoy. Let me explain. Because I was telling my friends, I was like, they had an interesting perspective of gravitating to familiar things, but I also think we unconsciously gravitate to familiar things in stories, but it's not exactly like, oh, reading the same book over and over again, but we look for books that have like similar elements, you know? So when I'm talking about this, for some reason, it could be like this. Some people read specific books because they are familiar with an author. That is an element. Some people read certain books because it possesses a certain element they like, such as like if it's like first person, dual person POV. Some people really enjoy third person. Some people read books because of the tropes in the books. So like if you are an enemies to lovers person or a friends to lovers, if you like love triangles, you know? And I'm mostly talking in the romance sphere, but even books that are like mysteries, people will gravitate to the mystery books with a romance subplot if they already enjoy romance. The thing is, from a young age, we are exposed to things like romance. We are exposed to things like friendships, and some people are exposed to more things than others. Like, for example, let's say you like sports. Would you be interested in reading a sports biography or something, right? If you're interested in sports, that is what you would probably gravitate towards, right? But if you're interested in sports and romance, right, you may gravitate towards love stories about athletes because you like sports, but you also like the concept and element of romance. When we're talking about the familiar, a lot of people's big hesitant point is it already exists, you know? So if you're holding yourself back because a market is oversaturated, if you're holding yourself back because you feel like there's no room for you in that space, this is your reminder that you don't have to be original, especially in this time. All you need to do is bring a new perspective to something. Do things you want to do in your own way. If that were the case of things being too saturated, we would not have a variety of TV shows, a variety of authors. We wouldn't have variety because even if someone already made something, they may have made it in a way that only connects to a certain group of people because that is what their perspective was limited to. But when there's so many different people and we are so multifaceted and there are so much layers to our personality, that if someone says something similar to someone but they put it in a way that clicks to people differently than what's already out there, that's still important. On to 2 reasons why people tend to hold themselves back. The first reason I thought of is the scarcity mindset. So this one I kind of jumped into a little bit. Basically, with a scarcity mindset, you view everything as a competitive space. Yes, having some competitive energy in you could really be beneficial, but when you see everything as competition to a point where you feel like that there's not enough space for you or the space is so limited that it holds you back, that's when it becomes an issue. And I did an entire post about having a scarcity mindset, so I'm not going to go too much into detail because I already did a blog post that explains this a lot better, which is on my blog simplylay.com, and I'm going to put it in the description. Once things get organized, I am going to have a blog post dedicated to show notes. But the second thing I wanted to talk about was imposter syndrome. So there is a very specific type of imposter syndrome that holds us back from taking the first step, which is the expert. So this form of imposter syndrome is the expert feels like because they don't know everything there is to know about a particular subject or topic, or they haven't mastered every process, they feel like a fraud, and it holds them back from actually going to do something that they really wanted to do. I wanted to put this here because this is a very specific type of imposter syndrome that holds you back from doing all the things that you want to do. But sometimes the best way to actually learn is by doing. Sometimes you have to be confused and go into it and be okay with doing things not mastered, because when you do something, it shows you what you already are naturally good at. You know, like when I started this podcast, I knew that I had good ideas, and the research that I do going into each episode could be very beneficial. But my thing that I had to learn was actually talking about things confidently, and also figuring out how to, I guess, promote the podcast, because promotion in general is something I'm still very weak at. And even with my blog post, it's very hard for me to promote myself and promote my work because it feels uncomfortable. I feel like I should do an entire episode about like social media, because I also have a lot of thoughts on that. But anyways, those two reasons combined prevents you from taking the first steps to your goals. And I also think that sometimes I guess this could be a third one, because originally I was going to do two, but sometimes when looking at our long-term goals, we overwhelm ourselves. And sometimes what really helps is focusing on what we could do in 30 minutes in the present, because I have a lot of dreams. Lately, I've been taking steps towards my dreams that I haven't done before, because I always thought this is going to take so much time. This is going to be difficult for me to do. And then I have to do this thing and this thing and that thing before I have to do that thing. So I would always overwhelm myself with the different things that doesn't matter in the moment. Like, it will probably matter someday, but at this point it doesn't. And I think sometimes as people we do that. So if you are feeling hesitant about taking the first steps to your goals, I want you to remember, allow yourself to have a perspective, because there is so much value simply because you are you. And I don't mean to sound cliche when I say that. I just mean that the only one who can see things from your perspective is you. I truly believe, like, even if you have like a brother or sister, their experience of the world and your experience of the world, even growing up in the same environment, are two different things. Even if you're close in age, you could be twins or triplets or whatever. Yes, you will have certain views on some things, but there are reasons why twins are not exactly the same, triplets are not exactly the same, and how they vary as people, because not only is their home environment what affects their perspective, but it's also the friends they meet, you know, and the interests they grow to have. We all have something to offer, especially in the things that we are passionate about. And we should not feel wary to take the steps we need to in order to fulfill our dreams. So, with that being said, that is your reminder for this episode, the card pull. I'm gonna do 2 cards because 2 cards fell out. So, what we got is the Panther and the Bat. Starting off with the Panther, keywords are annihilation of the unnecessary, purging. The Panther won't stand to see our growth or energy stagnate. Instead, it pounces into our lives and causes all kinds of havoc, with the ultimate intention of bringing us toward more fulfilling lives. It's unexpected, uncomfortable, and sometimes feels devastating. But after all the dust clears, it's easy to see the Panther's wisdom at work. We've all been through these experiences, and they've made us better people. Trust that the Panther's journey always leads to a brighter place. When in balance, brave, productive. When out of balance, self-destructive. To bring into balance, get rid of the unnecessary. Bat, darkness, letting go, death leading to rebirth. Before emerging, the bat awaits for the sun to set and the moon to rise. In the darkness, it can see all that was invisible in the daylight hours. The bat is a master of the subtle senses, of the underlying forces that causes some things to prosper and other things to fade. The bat card shows up to signify the ending of a chapter, the closing of a door. The bat comes swiftly, encouraging us to move on. In just a few hours, a new day dawns. No more lingering in the past. When in balance, accepts, adapts, adjusts. When out of balance, refuses to let go, reminisces. To bring into balance, watch the sunrise. So, with that being said, both of these cards felt like they were really fitting, especially getting them together, because they both have this energy of releasing and letting go, which I think in order to move forward to pursue your dreams, you really have to get over the things that are happening in your head, the fear, and also not listen to people when they tell you or discourage you from doing something just because something is saturated or what you want isn't the most original thing. So that is just your reminder. And to end off, what I am grateful for right now is Pinterest, because since I've been looking forward to a new hobby, I've been doing bracelet making, and Pinterest has been a real lifesaver for me into getting inspired about different patterns and things to try. And I've been using that and creating shorts more focused on kind of how I'm developing with my hobbies, specifically bracelet making and, of course, reading and books. So, yeah, that is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, follow the podcast. It would mean the world to me. And I hope this inspired you in some ways, or kind of at least shifted your perspective or opened new ways of thinking for you. But regardless, have a good day, evening, or night, and I will talk to you in the next one. Okay, bye.